Good morning. I'm Alan Blakey. I'm really happy to be here to celebrate CCPC's 50-year plus members. As you heard, these are our church friends who joined at least 50 years ago, and in some cases 60, 70, and in one case more than 80 years ago. So if you look at the insert in your bulletin, you'll see their names and dates of service. You will be impressed. We count 39 of this select group in our membership. And I'm happy to say that 13 or 14 are here with us today. If you don't know them, you can spot them either by their name tags or corsages. And then we have others attending on Zoom, listening in, participating that way. Our members of this select group joined the church at different stages of their life. Some grew up here, some came as young adults, as couples, as parents with their families. In each case, they found something here that was inviting and nourishing, and they stayed, and they're special to us. With their decades of experience, these members have become the institutional memory of the church. They've coached us, they've showed us how things work, they've told us stories and made us laugh, they've listened to us, and they've given us love and strengthened our faith. So, to you honorees, I want everybody to join me in giving another round of thanks, please. Now, as Molly said, the real meat of this is our three speakers who represent this select group. So, let's listen and learn. First, Julia Fegley.
And I joined this church shortly after we moved to Chevy Chase. Our house was only 3 blocks up the way on Connecticut Avenue, so it was very easy to get here. I have a lot of stories because I've done a lot of things. I've been an elder. I've been a chair of a session committee. I've been on a pastoral nominating committee. I've been a Sunday school teacher. And I've done a lot of things, but I tried to think, is there any one thing that I can take credit for having done? And of course, I'll have to tell you my story of the women. There was a women of the church group here that met at noon on a weekday, and of course, that ruled out a lot of people who worked or had young children at home. So I decided we had to do something about that. And I invited, first of all, young women who had young children or who were working, those who were probably 35 or less. And I invited them to my house for an organizational meeting. Well, they came, and they came in numbers. And I remember we ran out of chairs, and so we all sat on the floor. But it was a wonderful meeting, and the beginning of Circle 11, which many of you were members of. Oh, there's some who here. There are some who are here that are members of Circle 11. Well, after that successful beginning, I tried the next group, and we called that the Business and Professional Women. And that group met on Thursday nights until, I guess, COVID closed you down. And that was a very successful group also. I felt this has met a real need in the church, and I'm really happy to have been a part of it. The nice thing is, if you look in the Geneva Hall on the first Wednesday of each month, you'll probably see a new circle, thanks to Barbara Howe, Susie, a lot of you who worked on that. We are now having a new women's group, And as for Circle 11, it didn't exactly die, but once in a while we have a little reunion thanks to Peggy. And I'm very happy to have done that. It's been a good experience for me, and I want to leave a challenge to those of you who have been sitting in the back pew or staying at home and looking at your computer screen. There are things that you can do, and there are groups that you can join, or you can start your own. Get yourself up and get busy. It's fun. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Marty Hudtloff, and my wife and I, Mary Lou, have been members of the Chevy Chase Presbyterian Church for 54 years. And today, I know I'll be probably preaching to the choir a lot today, but there are probably new members of our church over the past 20 years that don't know about this special person that I'm going to be talking about today. If you look at the back of your program, your bulletin, you'll see a man's name of Kenneth Lowenberg, Minister of Music Emeritus. And some of the new members might ask, well, who was this gentleman? And that he was so important to this church and to us when we joined the church. He was a young man. He was a choir director and organist. And we knew immediately, because we loved to sing and loved music, that this was an exceptional person. And he organized every service, the music portion of that service, with the prelude and the postlude he played. He organized and had the wonderful chancel choir with the wonderful anthems that they sang. The hymns that were selected were always so apropos to the worship service. And we knew this gentleman was an essential portion and should be we wanted to do whatever we could to keep him around for many years, and of course we have. But the one thing we didn't have when Ken started, was an organ. The organ was terribly out of date, and there was some feeling of completely in the church that something had to be done. And a committee was established, and we began raising money. We were blessed to have a major contributor that sort of stimulated the giving, but it took us 2 or 3 years before we finally got enough money to finally fund that organ. But behind the scenes all the time was Ken Lowenberg. He was working with the Rieger Company and the manufacturer of the organ to make sure that that organ would fit into this beautiful sanctuary. And as you can see today, the pipes are so placed that we can still see the beautiful stained glass windows. And those were all things that were sort of considered. But Ken was always behind the real nitty-gritty in getting this organ. Along with the organ, of course, Ken directed the chancel choir, but he also directed the other choirs. We had a lot of little choirs at the time, a lot of young people just like we had today, but we had different stages of members of the choir. We also had bell choirs. Ken directed a number of bell choirs. There was the beginner bell choir, and then there was even one for seniors who wanted to try to learn how to play the bells. But there was only one real bell choir, and that was the Chevy Chase Bell Choir. And when my wife, Mary Lou, found out about the bell choir, she was very much enthusiastic about it and couldn't wait to join. She had played bells back in Ohio in her church, and she was lucky enough to join that bell choir. And that bell choir played for the, of course, for the services occasionally, but then they also played for the local area. They played for Ingleside, the retirement communities, churches, concerts all over the area. They were really well respected. And the highlight, again, was back in 2004 when Mrs. George W. Bush invited the choir to come and play for a gathering that she was having, and it was such an honor for them, and they were so well received. Now to go back just again for the few more things. I could talk about Ken for a long time, but I'll try to wrap it up closely. But when that organ was was installed and became part of the church, Ken organized what is called the Bach Marathon, which he started and has been continued on. He invited organists from all over the city to come and play on the beautiful Rieger organ, and they had an all-day affair. It went for, I think, 4 or 5 hours, where they'd come and perform one of their favorite Bach numbers. And finally, I'd like to just mention, and of course that is still continued today. They're in, I think, the 49th year of the Bach Marathon. And finally, I want to mention the church concert series, which Ken organized, and it's become a staple, a part of our community, whereby people of great talent, whether they're choirs or brass groups or whatever they were invited to come and perform at our church. And it not only was an asset for the church, but for our community as well. And so, after 38 years, Ken announced his retirement in 2006. And at that time, the session of Chevy Chase Church honored him with the member as a minister of music emeritus. And so today we give thanks to the music that Ken Lowenberg provided our church over the years, and how it was so important in the overall service to our church. We were truly blessed by his service. Thank you.
Ken is here today, and I don't think he knew that this was going to be said today. So Ken, would you stand up?
Good morning. I'm Walt Laessig. Susie and I have been members here since the spring of 1969. Hard to believe. How did we happen to get here? We came in the spring of '68 from upstate New York, where we had been together for 8 years, 6 in university, and 2 when I was first practicing law. After we were here, in the winter of '69, Susie happened to be out walking with our 2 young daughters. I think it was in the middle of February on a cold day. And she encountered another young mother with her children. And they got to talking. The other family lived just a few blocks down the same street. That woman happened to be Ellen Laessig, who became a friend of more than 50 years. Like the good social worker that Ellen was, she got Susie's and my history, family history, in pretty short order, and realized that we had both been raised in Presbyterian churches from the time we were born, and indeed had been attending church even while at university, which was not so common, I have to tell you. And so Ellen suggested to Susie that she needed a Presbyterian church, and where was it? It was, of course, this church. She also told Susie that our soon-to-be 3-year-old needed to go to weekday nursery school, which was news to us, and which all 3 of our kids went through the weekday nursery school program here. Then, after joining, we found in relatively short order that the church became not only the center of our religious life, but our social life. So many of our friends, some still with us, became our closest friends socially and otherwise. We had some university friends whom we'd known in the early 60s who lived in this area and remained very close friends. But most of our closest of friends have been through this church. Susie and I had the privilege of serving in a number of ways over the years. Susie was a deacon for some years. She was also part of women's circles. I, starting in the early 70s, served not one but 2 times on session. I was also a member of what was then the Board of Trustees, which was merged into session in the early 1980s, and it actually had legal ownership of the church and other administrative functions. Over the last 50 years, most of the time, I have served on either or both of the church finance committee or investment committee. And one of the wonderful things that we got to do together then in our early 30s was from 1973 to 1975, we taught the church's senior Sunday school, and which was a lot of fun. I'm somewhat, well, more than somewhat, a lot surprised that most of those teenagers are now at least 65 years old. So time has passed. Looking back, I'm always reminded of how extremely fortunate we are in this congregation. That is not just my wife and me, but all of us, because it is a community of its own. And as you all know, whatever your age, in our society, things have changed tremendously since the 1960s. You know, just mathematically, our population has grown from about 200 million people to over 340 million. Happily, much of that growth has been driven by our population becoming much more diverse, whether by ethnicity or race, all of which I think is a wonderful thing. On the somewhat less positive side, many of us, certainly in major urban areas, have seen community involvement drop significantly. I think it's driven by a number of factors, including the pace of modern life, in the last couple of decades, the increasing power of electronics for good or ill, including for those people in certain professions, being on call electronically 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Happily, myself, never experienced it. Another thing that we've seen over the last 45 or 50 years is that large segments of our population, as we've changed so much from I'll call a manufacturing economy for simplicity, to a service economy, that in real terms, the financial resources of a lot of people in our society are lower in constant dollars than they were 45 or 50 years ago, which is, frankly, an extraordinary shame, and of course adds to many of the stresses in our society today. So, to conclude, the great blessing we still have, are there as many of us as there were 50 years ago? No. But we have, unlike a lot of churches today, a substantial church population, membership population, and with the help of the generosity of our members and income from our substantial, not huge, but substantial endowment, able to still fulfill the missions of the church. Believe me, I chaired the finance committee in this church as far back as 1975. And stewardship and financial resources have never been easy. But I call on you to continue to be as generous as you can in support of the church. You have hundreds, if not thousands, of people who have preceded you and done the same. Thank you very much.